consciousness, the final frontier. These are the voyages into the universe between your ears. Our mission: to explore collective wisdom, seek out amazing secrets, and spread the message of personal potential.
All right, so hello everyone. I'm Tim Starr, your host on The Universe Between Your Ears. I'm joined today by my co-host, my co-captain, Mr. Gabi Masheyev.
Hello to everyone. Once again, pleasure to be here.
Men and women, ladies and germs, I don't know, all the ships at sea. We are joined today by a recent friend of mine named Joie Cheng. She's a best-selling author, speaker, transformation coach, energy healer, and a circle facilitator. And she's on a mission to touch lives and inspire women to live as love. Growing up, she endured many trials and tribulations, including her parents' messy divorce, 2 near-death experiences, bouts with depression, finding herself in an emotionally abusive relationship, and experiencing the death of her mother at age 27 and father at age 31. However, it was through these experiences that she cultivated the empowerment tools of energy healing and life coaching and redesigned her life from the ground up. Joy, thank you for being here. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Tim and Gabby. It's a pleasure.
So I'm not entirely sure where we're going to start off on this. Maybe what we can do is, I was looking through your book. She's got a book called The Naked Truth. A woman's journey to self-love. And I want to be honest, I really like the book, and that's not blowing smoke. I wouldn't bring it up if I didn't really like it. It's the kind of a book that you can open up kind of anywhere and read a short chapter and pick up some things to think about. And you've got some nice little takeaways at the end of each chapter. And I think it's really a very usable, very even practical kind of a book, as much as it tells a story for you as well. So you want to maybe talk about that a little bit, how you came up with the title and you know, where the book came from?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm grateful and glad that you liked the book so much. And I was a little nervous when you said about being honest at first. I'm like, oh, what am I going to say? But that's been a pretty unanimous response, which I'm, so honored by and grateful for. But yeah, as far as the title, I mean, that's something that, really the whole book kind of just came to me, but the title came to me. It was a process. It wasn't like I necessarily knew, although that was one of the first things I did know. But yeah, that just came to me, The Naked Truth. And then the subtitle came a little bit later because I knew that there were other books out there called The Naked Truth, but that felt like really what my story was about. So the process of my book, it's something that I didn't actually know I was going to do for a long time. I know there's a lot of people out there that might be thinking, oh, I've always wanted to write a book. That's a big dream of mine. Right. That actually was never my dream. So I can't say that was true for me until about 4 years ago. I would say in 2014, I was at a seminar and I heard the speaker, James McNeil, speak, and I talk about this in my book. But he really inspired me. He, was talking on stage about how when we die, if our story isn't written down, then it gets lost in the world forever. That there's nobody that could tell our story the way that we would. I mean, other people could write a story or a book about our lives, but it would never be told the way we would tell it, right? Mm-hmm. So it really got me thinking about this idea of a legacy, like what is it that I want to leave behind? And just really touched me, planted that seed inside me, made me think, you know what? Yeah, I need to write my story, and share that story with the world. So that was my journey of, planting that seed. And then, last year I finally, had the plan and made it happen. And I knew that it was going to be about my journey to self-love, because that's what I know has been my biggest struggle in my life. And so that's what I'm here to help other people with. But I didn't know exactly how I was going to write the book, like what it was going to look like, and so that was something that just came as I went through the process and, basically wrote down the lessons that I learned about self-love, because, I sat down and said, okay, so my first chapter is going to be my story. Like, where do you even begin? Right? Like for me, I was just like, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start. So I just said, okay, well, I know this is going to be about self-love. So I just started writing down the lessons that I've learned about self-love. And then from there, that became my chapter titles. And then the stories came along with that.
So in your book, there was something, as you were speaking, there was something that I wanted, I thought about it, and then I wanted to bring it up, and just that quickly it disappeared on me. But there's several, like the takeaways. There's some really good nuggets in there, and some that I took notes on. And some of the things that you say in there are, one of the big ones that hit me was, don't neglect yourself when taking care of other people. And you were talking about when you were taking care of your mother when she was sick, and realizing that it wasn't in your best interest to be there with her all the time. You needed to have some time away so that you can sort of recharge and then go back and be strong and be more present for her, right? And I think that's an important point to make for people, because lots of people would tend to just, there are a lot of people out there who just, they give and give and give and give and give, and they're focused on taking care of everybody else in the family and friends and whatever, and all of a sudden they're sick or, you want to expand on that point at all, or did I just take all the windows?
Oh no. Yeah, I think that is, a good point. Like you said, it's so easy, and especially as women, like we tend to want to give so much, right? And I think that our society, makes like taking care of yourself can seem selfish, right? And especially if you've got a loved one that's sick. And so I think, yeah, for me, my experience, that journey with my mom was understanding what I needed to do for myself and not allowing, like my sister asked me to live with my mom, to like maybe move out of my place I had, my apartment that I had, and move in with her while I was taking care of her. And it was really me making a decision that was best for me, and not allowing like my sister to pressure me or to feel like that was something that I needed to do, but really understanding what was best for me. And yeah, it really helped me to have that balance. And I still had a full-time job. I thought about taking a leave of absence, especially like that last week, because she really needed me to do everything then. But then it didn't end up happening because then she passed. But before that, I was spending half the time half of the week with her at her house, and then half the week at my place. And so I had, I did make some adjustments with my job. I was really grateful that my job I had allowed me that flexibility to work from home. Part of the time, so I could be there for my mom when she needed me more. But yeah, still do what I needed to do, have my life like in the city, in Chicago, with my friends and my place and, my boyfriend at the time, and sort of have that respite care, because it allowed me to show up more for her when I was there, like you said. So.
Yeah, you can never be sick enough to help somebody else, right? To help them not be sick.
Yeah, and then I think that's where you can build resentment too, right? Because you're like, if you feel like you're just doing everything for somebody, and then they may not be the most grateful when they're not feeling good, right? It's easy to be in a bad mood when you're not feeling good, or and it's So I think that I'm hoping that my story can inspire other people, that if you're in a similar situation, to not forget about yourself and whatever it is. With my dad, it was different because he was in Taiwan, and so I literally had to leave my whole life in San Diego and go be with him. And yet, even when I was there, I still found balance. We had someone take care of him. He hired somebody to take care of him. And I actually, when I got there, he asked me if I could take care of him by myself. And I said no, because I knew that, for me to really show up, I needed someone else to be there. Because it's enough to take care of someone, but then when it's someone that you're so connected to, you're dealing with your emotions, you're dealing with their emotions, you're doing with physically taking care of them, taking care of yourself. It's a lot, right? And so I knew that I needed to have that support, and I still found ways to like work out and, make sure I was getting enough rest and just taking care of myself, doing my own work so that I could show up for him. Cool.
One of the words that you used while you were just speaking was balance. And that was part of the notes that I took from the book is one of the other comments that you said was that it's important to have outside interests so that you can stay grounded and balanced. And that rang a bell with me, because that's something that I've been preaching for a long time to people. And that's another thing people don't I don't know, we don't think about it, or maybe it's just a case a lot of time where people just don't understand the value of that. But you got to have outside interests. You can't just be focused on you and your spouse and whatever. And there's got to be things outside that give you, perspective and new ideas and things, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's something that, I learned through not having that, right? Being in a relationship where I felt like that was all I had, was the relationship and my work and my friends and family, but not really having other interests. And so from that, I found an interest in dancing and Latin and ballroom dancing. And that was, has been a big passion of mine, and, yoga, meditation, and, just lots of different activities.
Gabby's a big salsa dancer.
Oh, really? Are you good?
No, not at all. No. I was, I guess, taken to a lesson against my will. That's why joking. I also really like your book because it was, first of all, it was really very open and honest. I thought it was to the point of like courageously honest. I mean, I mean, you really gave the naked truth, right, in that book, right? Something that I wouldn't be able to do, for example. So I totally see that you are, I guess you felt that you were ready to take these kinds of risks, right? For me, I felt like I wouldn't want to expose myself to that degree of intimacy. And it's like, but that's what I guess made it a huge impact. I think people relate, right? Because you have to be authentic to speak to the people, and so that they listen, right? Very interesting, because I kind of set out on a journey with you. You were looking for self-love, right? You wanted to, find self-love, what it means, yeah. And so I was going from chapter to chapter with you, but I took it on, I got it on Audible. So I had the privilege to actually listen to you reading the book, right? And, I guess from the first chapters, you're saying that you are sharing your story in hopes of finding healing, right? Through sharing, because you're saying to liberate from the shame that we carry, right? That is achieved through sharing, right? And I guess being open about this, right? And this is where was the first kind of sort of like pause that I made, and I started reflecting on this, right? It's like, because I was thinking at the same time, okay, so you are sharing your story, to try to heal. Do you think that healing is really achieved by focusing on the story? Because the story is pretty heavy, right? It's an emotional story, right? So, and the reason why I'm asking you this is because later on in the book, you're talking about the law of attraction, and what you focus on expands, right? So then by basically reliving all these emotions, don't you think you're kind of perpetuating them a little bit? What do you think on that point?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do feel like, because, and I think I talk about this in the book too, but about how shame is something that lives like in the closet, and that when we're able to bring it out into the light, that's when we can, that's where healing begins. And so I do feel like, me sharing my story, I mean, I already did a lot of healing work, before I even wrote my book, obviously, just through things that I've been involved in and programs, and just my own, process that I've gone through. But there is something about putting it down on paper, like in a form where it's, and honestly, like when I wrote those chapters about my parents and taking care of them when they were sick and, through their death, I actually couldn't even write those chapters. Like I sat down to write them, and I do a prayer, every time before I write, and I just say, God, like allow me to be a channel for divine wisdom to flow through me, and, and just open myself up to that. And I like nothing, I just couldn't type, like nothing would move, right?
I could imagine, yeah.
Blocked. And it was weird though, because I felt like I'd done a lot of healing work. I kind of, not that you ever get over something like that, but like I felt okay about it. And but then I realized that I just needed to do it a different way. So I went over to a friend's place and I spoke those chapters, and I, recorded them with her, and then I sent them off to get transcribed and, go through the editing process. And so I realized that I was committed to getting the book done, like however it took, right? It didn't have to be all sitting down and typing like the rest of the book was. Of course, if I did another book now, I would just record the whole thing, so that way I have the audiobook done already.
Yeah.
So I actually had to go back and do the audiobook. But actually, to be honest, like that was really healing too. I didn't expect, like I didn't know that that was going to be a healing experience. I just thought, okay, I'm just going to record this. Sitting there in my closet by myself on like a major heat wave in San Diego, where it was 97 degrees one day and it was like 92 the next day. And literally, I couldn't have air conditioning on because of the sound. Not that I even have air in my place, but like I wouldn't, even if I did, I couldn't have it on. I couldn't have the windows open because then there might be noise, right? So I had everything closed at night, and I actually did it naked because it was so hot that was like the only way I could do it. So I was sitting in my closet naked and recording my audiobook, and I did it in 2 nights. But it was like, there aren't really words that I can describe the experience, but I'll just say that it felt like something was healing about sharing my story, like speaking it, as well as having it written down, and just feeling like I was talking to that person, right? Because I know that there's lots of people, but when you're listening, you're one person, right? And you want to feel like that person is speaking to you. And I felt like I was doing that. And so
I thought that the fact that you were actually the recording artist, right? The voice artist who did it for yourself, right? For the book. You couldn't really do it any other way because your voice carried that emotion. I felt it. I felt when you were going through some heavy chapters, the way that you were brought up and the father situation, right? With the change, transgender change, right? Which was a fascinating story. And that he goes back, right? He goes back. And I just I started thinking how it could have been for a girl. You were a child of divorce when you were 8 or 9, right? Divorce happened. Were you in the U.S. at that time, or your father was in Taiwan back then?
No, I was born in America, and my parents came to America right before I was born.
So he went back. He went back afterwards, right?
To Taiwan? Oh, like way later, yeah. And the final few years of his life, he retired. I mean, he was going back and forth for a while between Taiwan and Chicago. Of course, missing the winters in Chicago, so he would go to Taiwan during the winter and then, Chicago during the summer. But then eventually he just spent the last few years of his life or so in Taiwan full time.
But what you faced as a female, it could not even match in any way, even close, right? To discover really how to be independent and respectful and know yourself enough to love yourself and this journey from one relationship to another as you were discovering from each one the lessons and your journal, I guess takeaways you call them, right? I thought are going to be extremely useful, especially for girls, right? But for guys like me, it was a very curious, engaging read, and I really thank you for that book. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of women can relate, but I think that there's probably, lessons for men to learn from it as well, right? For yourself and maybe, a perspective of a woman. Not that I can say that all women are like me, but at least you get a woman's perspective. And yeah.
I think a lot of it was not gender specific. A lot of the lessons are very much just, they're equally apt for men and women. So yeah. So guys, go read it. Yeah. Are
you as this book was written, have you started with a certain idea of what self-love is, and then at the end of the book you changed that idea, or was that like a transformative experience for yourself as well, or how would you define? I know it's probably question that would require some time to think and reflect upon, right?
But you're not going to get it here.
How would you describe self-love? You know, I mean, what is loving self to you at this time? I know it's a journey,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
a process. Yeah, it's a process.
Well, let's see. I would say that self-love, I mean, it's something that has a lot of things that encompass it, right? Because self-care is a piece of self-love. I think that when we think of self-care, I feel like that's an expression of self-love, right? That I love myself enough that I'm going to do things to take care of myself. Like I'm going to eat healthy.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep my body active, you know, like I'm going to get a massage, or there are things that, you know, there's things that I do that I don't think are luxury. I don't consider it a luxury. It's actually a necessity that I make sure I do so that I can stay my best version of myself, right? So I feel like that's an expression. I think, you know, self-love is really knowing, like I say in my book, like the truth of who you are is understanding that we're not our thoughts. So when a lot of the thoughts that we have that make us feel like shit really aren't true, right? And so it's understanding that that's not true, and knowing who you are. Because when you know that, to me, it's really hard not to love ourselves. It's easy when we get stuck in our head, you know, and the critic mind, you know, starts to say all the reasons that you're not good enough or what, you know, all that stuff. It's easy to not love yourself then, right? But when we can realize that that's not our truth and remind ourselves of what is true, then I think it's easy to love ourselves.
I feel that you definitely went through the journey, because in the earlier chapters, I was kind of following your path of thinking, and I was like, you were making some conclusions that you needed to have, you know, hobbies and like different interests, right? And not just focus on your work and on your relationship or whatever, right? So I was like, okay, she's getting to what self-love is, and she, from this experience, she decided, okay, that's basically being, you know, pursuing your own interests, right? Okay, so let's hold on to that. And then I went on with you, like exploring further and further. And at some point, I think later in the book, you know, there are other things. When, remember, you encountered this relationship when this guy introduced you to like being vegan and raw food and all that stuff, right? So you're making some conclusions from there. And I think at the end, your definition that I'm hearing now, being true to yourself and taking your mind, basically, it all comes down, I think, to what you're saying is removing resistance is putting you on the path to self-love, right? Removing resistance. You know, in every moment, the mind will come up with something,
right?
That will, you know, judging itself, right? Or not letting yourself feel happy for some reason, attaching some conditions, some conditions to your happiness, right? So, you know, what do I need to do to feel happy today? You know, okay, let's take dancing, let's take salsa, whatever. Let's do raw food. Let's do become vegan. All these things, you could just go on and on and on, but that's not the answer.
Right.
And I think you're arriving to this at the end, you know, of your book.
Yeah, it's like those are all the expressions, but it's really an internal. It's your mindset, right? It's really like, yeah, and making choices that feel right to you. And so self-love is simple, but it's not necessarily easy, right? There's things that it requires of us that we don't necessarily want to do that are difficult. You know, for me, one of them was when I came to San Diego, like that was something I share in my books. That was a dream that I always wanted, but I was leaving this guy behind that I really loved. And I almost didn't come because of that, but I just knew that it was something I needed to do for myself. And so, you know, self-love can require us to make difficult decisions, which is why I think, you know, a lot of us can struggle with that, because it's easier to, you know, to give in, right? Because we care about someone else and we want them to be happy or whatever the situation is, or out of fear. And because it's easier to do, you know, than the thing that's difficult, but we know is what we need to do.
Fear of the unknown, even if it looks promising, is greater most of the time than knowledge of the pain that you're in. I mean, at least it's a known quantity. You've lived through it already. you know what you're dealing with. But when you're talking about change of situations, you know, whatever they may be, lots of unknowns. And it might look good, but you still don't know, man. It might kill me.
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, I want to ask about one of the things you're talking about in the book is a 100-day challenge, the self-love, 100 days of self-love. And so I'd like you to talk about this, and because you went beyond the 100-day challenge and you went for a full year. So I'm just curious, tell people about what this was about. And then what I want to know is when you finished it after a year, did that change you, or how did that change you? I'm assuming it actually did. And you know, what did you learn? What were the big takeaways out of that?
Yeah, so the 100-day self-love practice that I share in my book, one of the practices, so I stumbled upon a group called the 100 Days of Self-Love on Facebook. Right before that, I would say that, you know, I was in an emotionally abusive relationship, and that was actually when I realized that I didn't love myself. So I didn't even know that that was like an issue for me until I was in that relationship, and then I, you know, said, okay, I must not love myself, because, you know, why would I continue to put myself in this situation if I did, right? And so that was a point where I became aware that that was something that I had an issue with. And I made a decision that I was going to end that relationship and then learn how to love myself. And so then from that point, then that's when, you know, the universe started bringing things to me to help support that decision. And so one of those things was this practice. And so what I did was for, you know, 100 days, and like you said, I did it longer than that, but the intention in the beginning was to do it for 100 days. So every day I would write one thing that I loved about myself, and then I would post that in the group. And sometimes I would post it on my own page as well, and write it in my journal. And, you know, like I share, I think in my book, like when I first started doing it, it felt like I didn't know that I could do it. I was like, how am I going to find 100 things to love about myself? You know, it felt like this big thing. And, but I was like, okay, you know, I'm going to do this because I know this is something that's going to help me. So I started doing it. And then, yeah, I you know, continued on beyond that 100, you know, like you said, a year. I don't even actually know how many days I did it. I kind of like lost track or something, but I just kept going on with it, right? And yeah, it was it's such a simple thing, but it was a really powerful practice, because one of the things I learned is that there really is an infinite number of things that I love about myself, you know? And so I think that it challenges you, and it really trains our mind to look for the good rather than the bad, because so often the things that we think about are negative about ourselves, right? And so it really makes us start focusing on what is good about us, you know, what we love.
What would be like examples? I also came across this thing. I guess I kind of dismissed it because I thought, oh, well, that's another thing that the millennials do. You know, they're so in love with themselves that they need to list this for the whole world to know why they love themselves. But what would be like examples of what people say what they love about themselves? Like the way the looks, or what, like, or the way.
I mean, it's really it's anything, right? So, you know, sometimes, you know, it could be like something, you know, about your body, but even that is hard for people to do, right?
Yeah.
There's things that most of us can't look at ourselves in the mirror without, you know, judging ourselves, and with clothes on, let alone naked, like try doing that, right? Yeah. So it could be things, about your physical self, or it could be things about your personality, or it could be your way of being, or, you know, like, I love that I'm willing to make difficult decisions, or, you know, for example, or I love that I'm willing to be honest no matter what, you know, like, so whatever is true for you, you know, that day in that moment.
Got it.
I would think you've got to be a changed person coming out of this.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like I said, I didn't think that I could do 100 days, you know, it didn't feel like feasible. I don't think I could probably even do like 30 days or something. Like it felt so beyond what I could comprehend. But it was a powerful practice, and all of them, you know, in the book really are. So.
Do you think you would have done it if you weren't posting things publicly? If you were just writing these things down for yourself, you think you would have stuck to it?
Maybe, but I think, yeah, sort of accountability, and also just seeing what other people are posting, and just that synergy and that group energy is really powerful, and being witnessed in that way, right? People are, that's where it takes it to that next level, where it's a little more, it's vulnerable, right? To tell other people what you love. Yeah, and it's not necessarily just good things too, right? It's easy to think, oh, I'm just going to say what I love about myself in a good way, but when you can actually love the parts of yourself that aren't quote unquote good, I think that's where it gets really like good, I guess, like juicy, right? And yeah.
Hi, this is Tim Starr. Thanks for joining me and Gabi on the universe between your ears. We really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us for a little while. And we'd like to see you again. So be sure to subscribe wherever it is you're consuming the podcast from, whether it's YouTube or Stitcher or iTunes or whatever the hell else is out there. We want to see you again. We also want to hear from you. So let us know what you think of each episode. Let us know if you got an idea for a future episode that you think would be just killer. Absolutely, let us know. All right? Thanks again, and we will see you next time around.